I'm back from my local woodworking center and I've got some specialty glue. We got some hide glue. Hide glue has a little bit more open time and it helps with assembling dovetails. And that's one of the things that we'll be doing today. I want to assemble that case. I got to see how big this is. Sometimes a little assembly can be fun. So let's get on after it. I'll see you inside. I'm Roby Price, and welcome to my garage workshop. In this series, we're building a Spalted Pecan dresser. Case assembly. I'm back in the shop and getting ready to start. A little late start this morning, primarily due to the weather. I'm getting ready to cut my panels to size, and that is going to define the overall size of the cabinet. Now, whenever I do something like this, and I've done it before, I'm just telling you about it now, I always kind of look to a book, Illustrated Cabinet Making, and it's got good solid dimensions for multiple pieces of furniture, and they're all designed on human type parameters. So unless you have somebody that's about 8 feet tall or 3 feet tall, this book is going to really coincide with the furniture that's out there. Now this can happen. Sometimes clients want something very specific, but for the most part, this book helps me get right in line where I need to be. So here's my side panel. What dimensions are important? Well, the client wants it as tall as possible. And I told him, based on what I was going to be getting, which was going to be roughly 8-foot plank, we were looking at a maximum possible height of 48 inches. And that's not going to happen because, quite frankly, the ends of these boards are never good. So maybe 44, maybe 43. We'll see where we go with that. That'll define our drawer sizes as soon as we know the height. But I'm going to squeeze as much out of this as I can. Now the width, that's an easy dimension. That's going to be 18 inches. And that corresponds with just about all chest of drawers widths. That's a good depth for the drawer to slide out. It gives you room for the back panel. It gives you room for the front. And typically about 18 inches is what you're going to see in a chest of drawers. Now that defines this panel pretty clearly. Now what about the overall width? That's going to be my secondaries, and the client wants a specific dimension on that too. He wants no more than 42 inches, and that's going to encompass the feet, so that's going to step it in even a little bit farther because we're looking at 3/4 of an inch, maybe 1.5 inches on that. So we're probably talking about 40 inches, maybe 41 inches on that. So I've got my rough dimensions, and I'm getting ready to square this stuff up. The first thing to do is take it to the joiner, which is over there, and I will put one square edge on my front. So I've got a little sapwood right here. That's going to be on the back side, so I already know what's front and back on this piece. I've got similar issues over here, getting rid of as much sapwood as I can. So we'll cut these things. I'll put one edge on the joiner and rip it to width. Then we'll come back over here to my workstation where I've got a piece of sacrificial MDF on it, and we will use a track saw to cut the length. I'm over here at the table saw, and I've got myself set up for crosscuts. Now, what I've done here is I've put my crosscut sled in here. I've got a clamp on top, and a face clamp, F-style clamp on the back, holding it firmly against this fence. I do not want it to move. Additionally, I have put a support fence, or a support runner, in the back, and that is clamped down to the table saw with 2 clamps that I use for sacrificial fences on the rip fence. So basically, now that you've got it all set up, it's just a matter of pushing it through. I have checked. I really want to capture this right here. That's a pretty detail right there. So I'm going to be pushing this. I'm trying to get as much as I can out of it. And that end over there, that'll be what gets cut off. This right here, this is the reference face, that's up front. So when we cut the other side, we'll flip over this way instead of over this way because I want to reference the same face. Well, I'm set up over here at the table saw, and you've probably noticed my rig is changed. I've got both side faces here, and I wanted to do that because I want to make one cut to ensure both are exactly the same. Doing that, it sets the foundation. If they're not perfect, I'll be fighting it for the rest of the project, and this ensures an absolute perfect dimension. This is set up touch a feel, you can't get any closer. Now I've got 2 clamps here to ensure it stays that way. I've got 2 parallel clamps here moving it to the fence, so that's not going to move. I would point out that when I pushed it the first time, it went nowhere. The friction between this piece and this and the weight was so much, the friction was overcoming everything. So I put a piece of non-stick tape right there, and you could find that at your local woodworking store or online. So I'm set up here to make my cut, and I'm at 44 inches. So I'm going to get a little bit more out of my material than I had previously thought. And all those are good things. Well, I've done a little rearranging. I've got my horizontal mortising machine off to the side over here, and I've got my dovetailing machine on the same cabinet with its, I call it its elevator base. And it's needed for this project because if you look at these boards that I've got here in front of me, they've got to go underneath this thing. And quite frankly, I usually mount it on the front of my workbench. There's not enough room. So we're sitting pretty tall here. Board selection is important. So let me explain this a little bit. Picture this as though each side was rolled up into the case formation as though it's going to be in final configuration. I want the bad side on the inside where you can't see it. So I had to select these boards. There are some blemishes in a few of them, but I do have one good face on the 2 side boards. On the top and bottom, it doesn't matter. You're never going to see them unless you crawl inside the case. And quite frankly, I don't care if you do anyway. They're not shown. So what I'm going to do, I've got my good face underneath on both of these boards. This is the back, that's the back. Front, 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 front. So I'm starting to arrange these boards so I know where I am, and I'm labeling them. So I've even labeled the corners. I've got corner 1, which matches with this, corner 2, which matches down here, corner 3, which matches right here, and corner 4, which matches over there. All this is very important when we put it in the jig because these pieces turn around in the jig depending upon if you're cutting tails or pins, and the corners have to be on the same side. Otherwise, they won't match up. Now, the last thing, these are going to be pin boards. The sides are. And the fronts, the tops and the bottoms, those are going to be tail boards. And we're going to cut tails first. So these are going to move off, and I'm going to start focusing on that. But before I mount anything in the in the dovetailing jig, we've got to get our router set up, and that's what's next. The initial setup for the router is really pretty simple. I mean, it's really just getting a bit installed and putting a collar on. But I don't know that I've talked about this before. Whenever I put a router bit in the collet, I usually have it set up just at the base right here where this lines up. That'll give me a good squeeze on the bottom, but it doesn't bottom it out in the router bit. And that way I'm ensured of having a good seat on there without the bottom of the shaft interfering with how this thing tightens up. And you don't need to muscle it too much. Just get it good grip tight. And if the collet's still in good shape, the bit is too, it won't walk on you. Now for the vase, this is a collet, and the collet is designed to ride on the surfaces that the template provides you. And that's how you get the good dovetails and the accuracy. And you have different collets for different cuts, and those are all specified in the documentation that comes with the jig. This is an old Omni Jig. They don't make them anymore. As a matter of fact, I think I bought this 10 years ago, and you can't hardly even find parts for it online. But I've got the parts, and the jig works fine. And as you can see, it's large and robust. We will take a quick look at how we get the depth of this set, but I'm not going to go into extreme detail because in truth, you finding another one of these is going to be a little difficult. And the settings are very specific to the jig. So when you do your dovetails, pay special attention to the instructions that come with your tool. Well, this is, I don't know how well you can see that. There's a couple of stops right here and a place to actually put your router on this where the bit can come through. So you put your collet in there, and then you can lower the bit until it just touches the stop. And that's where you're supposed to be, right there. And that should define your depth of cut. Well, we're set up over here on the jig, and I've gotten my bottom board inside and clamped up, seated firmly against the template. And for the template, I have done some spacing. I've gotten all of the guides engaged. I used a 1/2-inch brass measure to try to get some uniformity with these all except the middle, and that's a little bit off one way or the other. These can be, one of the features of this particular jig is you can move these and put them wherever you want, and you can get some pretty decorative patterns with your through dovetails. And of course you can actually use this jig for half blinds as well. That's not the objective here. The objective here is strength. This is a structural joint. It won't be seen. So there's a lot about this that, you know, I'm not getting too wound up over as far as accuracy. I want it to be tight and I want it to be strong, but I don't really care if the aesthetics are there because it's going to get covered over by a piece of molding. So our router depth, our router is set, the bit is set to the appropriate depth. We've got our jig in place. The only thing left to do, and this is a nice feature of this, and I'm seeing it show up on a lot of other jigs as well, is this front piece right here. And what that does is it keeps the router from tipping on you like this, which will destroy the joint. And that's always been something that's a little difficult. So this is a great safety measure. In addition, it keeps the chips blowing down and out of my face. And seeing as how we are as high as we are, just to accommodate getting this board in place, that's pretty important to me. So the next step is to get the router out and actually start making a cut. And we'll do that next. So, God help me. Well, based on how much effort I'm putting into this, you might think my bits were dull. Well, I assure you they're not. The wood is just that hard. Well, as you can see, there are no chips in my face, but I can assure you there are plenty on the floor. Well, I'm out of the dovetailing jig. They're all cut, and I'm getting ready to do a dry fit, and it is tight. I've already got one corner set up. This is my second corner over here. This isn't like a drawer where you take both pieces, one in each hand, and start wiggling them together and maybe put it on there and tap it in place. These are big planks, and I mean seriously big. And I've had one of these that is cupped a little bit, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do the dovetails, because this will help straighten the whole unit out. But I want to dry fit, and I want to dry fit to really understand where we're going from here, to make sure that everything fits upright and I can move forward with starting to cut the dovetails for the dust frames. So what I've got here is I've got my wooden parallel clamps just holding this in place. And you see this guy right here is keeping him from tipping back, because he will. So the real trick is to get him started, and you get him started with a little persuasion. So I'm going to start tapping on the back side of this and pushing this tailboard into the pin board. Now I've got my clamp up here. You can't see it, but I got my clamp up there set up so that this piece is not moving on my table. So bear with me, and we'll see where we get with this. And again, initially I just want to get it started, and then I'll take the clamps off. I think that's probably enough. As you can see, one of them's already come off under its own accord. Now the other trick is to do this evenly. I've got to start marching up and down this line so that I don't crack this board, and you can do that. Well, I'm 90% of the way there. I've got to get a spacer that sits just atop the dovetails to pound the rest of it back in. And the reason is that because these dovetails are a bit proud, and that was on purpose. So I can't just put a board right on the back and move it in. I have to have something just elevated above. So, but for the most part, this went in pretty as you please. And we'll get the other section put on next, and then you'll get a real taste of how big this particular chest is going to be. Well, it's not the ideal spot, but it's what I have right now, and I will be going back and forth quite a bit. The first objective, I've got two joints situated. We'll get the other two on this. I want to ooze this one into place, and as soon as I get him just barely started, I've got to go to the other side over here, because it's this joint down there that's going to need some attention. And this is going to take a while, because I'm going to ooze him into place. Now I can drive this side completely home, but on that side, I'm going to have to get so far, then I'm going to have to shimmy him up a little bit, because again, we're proud. But this is actually going together quite well. I have no complaints. It just takes a little time. Okay, now back to the other corner. We'll be at this a while. Well, here it is, and it looks great. All the dovetails have been driven home, and the joints are nice and tight across the bottom. Couldn't ask for much better. And it's square without a whole lot of persuasion. It's square, and that's a good thing. So the next step is to take this piece, disassemble him, and then get ourselves set up to put the dovetails in for the dust frames. And those are going to be defined by the size of the drawers. Now that I know my opening, my final opening, I will calculate out how big those drawers are based on a geometric progression. We're going to start out with about 4.5 to 5 inches on top. Those are going to be very small drawers, but they will get bigger as we go down, and ending up at the bottom with about a 9.5 inch drawer and plenty of room for whatever you want to put in it. The dust frames will go in. They'll have a dovetail entry up front and in the back. And to tie them in, we'll just have a slip. We'll glue it into the front frame and have a slip tenon in the back, and that way it can expand and contract. I'm not cupped. I am not cupped at all across here, so I see no need for a through dovetail to help the board maintain its dimension. As a matter of fact, we probably won't even glue the intermediate to the panel. Let the wood expand and contract as needed. So after we get the dust frames put in place, we'll start building drawers. But until then, I'm going to let this sit overnight. I've got a lot of shavings to clean up, and that'll kill my day, as well as straighten up this garage and get ready for a totally different work process. So I'll see you tomorrow when we start on dust frames.